12:30. Welcome everybody to City Conversations. I'm Michael Alexander, Director of City Conversations. We're presented by SFU Public Square. We want to thank our sponsors, SFU Vancouver and the SFU City Program. Please come in, join us. Find a seat. Some right here, please. And we'll pull up some chairs here if you need to. This is a pretty formal, for those of you who haven't been here before, it's a very formal lecture room, but we do not have speakers and we do not have an audience. This is a conversation. We have presenters, and we have 3 today, and presenters just briefly frame the conversation. But most of the time is for you, the participants, and we expect you and urge you to participate. If you are tweeting, it's at CityCon, and we encourage you to tweet away. There's been a lot of tweeting on this topic today. So what is the topic? It's your home, and this one is about expectations, needs, and what is real. Right? Everybody's talking about the price of housing, mostly about the price of single-family residences in Vancouver. But a young generation feels cut out of the housing that their parents had. And modest, well-built, and perfectly serviceable Vancouver houses are being demolished and replaced with McMansions. All of this anxiety about housing is seeking culprits. Stop the foreign investors and their empty houses. What's the evidence for them and for how empty those houses are? We're going to find out. And the press breathlessly reports every uptick as housing prices inflate seemingly without cause. We've got 3 presenters today, and so helping us explore this topic are Evelyn Chia, who started the I Don't Have $1 Million Twitter campaign, software consultant and blogger Adrian Crook, who lives in a rented 1,000 square foot downtown condo and doesn't need $1 million, and Yasmin Hernandez is an economist and planner at the strategic research consultancy Urban Futures, and they study housing trends and their causes.
Yeah, well, thanks everybody for being here today. Never in my life would I have expected to be talking to people, especially on a topic that I didn't really know much about as of 2 months ago. And maybe you're wondering, like, why did I get into this? What happened for me to just go on Twitter, which I never used before prior to this, and make that statement. And for me, it was really reading about this young cardiologist, Dr. Marcio Penner, who wrote an op-ed in Vancouver Sun. And he said, you know, dear Mr. Robertson, dear City of Vancouver, I'm leaving and I'm taking my family with me to Chilliwack, where we can afford to have a house and to raise our family. And I think for me, I started thinking, you know, what about sort of my future? What about the future of my friends who are 30 to 40 years old and, you know, their future in the city? And I think the more I thought about it, the more I realized that possibly there is no future in the traditional sense of people like me here. If we ever want to own a home, it will be nearly impossible. And I know that the hashtag is sensationalist. It says don't have $1 million, but I had a choice. I thought about it. Should I say don't have 200K? Should I say Vancouverites can't afford homes? I had all sorts of options, but I thought that this tweet and this hashtag would make the most noise, and it did. So I'm glad that we're having this conversation. I'm really glad that we get to talk about all sorts of housing options and affordability.
My name is Adrian Crook. My day job is running a game design consultancy. I've been in video games for about 20 years. The blog that I started a few months ago is called 5 Kids, 1 Condo. And we, my partner Sarah, and I have 5 kids in Yaletown, in a 1,000 square foot condo on the 29th floor. My position when it comes to houses in particular are is sort of this, like I am happier and healthier and more environmentally responsible because I'm, consuming less with 7 people within the walls of a 1,000 square foot condo than, I've had past lives where I've lived in suburban houses that are 2,500 square feet for around $400 a month for utilities and, using a heck of a lot more resources. So I'll speak up even more. Yeah, so effectively, these are the values that I've chosen for my family, and this is why we live in downtown Vancouver.
Historically, we have seen a decline both at the regional level as well as within the city of Vancouver of single detached dwellings. In fact, between 2001 and 2011, according to the census, the region lost over 26,000 single detached units. And the reasons behind this decline are twofold. One, that Statistics Canada has reclassified single detached dwellings. The ones that have a suite in them are no longer considered the traditional single detached home, and they are now called attached ground-oriented units. So they are lumped into a bigger group of dwellings that are multifamily for that matter. So there is some of the single detached units that are just being reclassified and acknowledged to be not the home of just one family. And there's also the reality that some single detached units are making way for more for other types of dwellings, such triplexes, duplexes, and through the amalgamation of lots, they also have turned into apartment units. And we can see clearly that the growth in the attached ground-oriented segment of the dwellings has increased quite rapidly, and so has the apartment dwelling stock in Metro Vancouver. But if we look at the city of Vancouver, the pattern is very similar. And in fact, when you look at the loss in single detached units, that the city of Vancouver lost 18,930 single detached units over that decade, which accounts for 70% of the single detached units that were lost regionally. So the vast majority of the single detached dwellings that were lost regionally were lost in the city of Vancouver. And as you can see, we have grown quite robustly, population and dwelling-wise. We have added quite a few units and quite a few people. And in order to accommodate that growth, we see some transition and changes in the dwelling stock. And so going forward, this is the history, these are the trends, the more recent trends. And looking forward, the work that we do at Urban Futures is producing population and demographic and housing forecasts. And according to our estimates, which are consistent with the Mayor's Council estimates, we will be adding over 1 million people over the next 3 decades to the region. And in order to accommodate those additional 1 million people, we're going to have to add almost 500,000 new units to be able to accommodate the population growth that we expect. We would expect to see much more rapid growth than in the housing stock than the growth of the population to be able to accommodate those 1 million people. And in order to do so, our projection estimates that apartment dwellings will have to increase faster than ground-oriented. And this ground-oriented classification that we use to forecast includes both single detached and other attached ground-oriented dwellings. So combined, ground-oriented dwellings will have to add over 280,000 units over the next 3 decades. And we would expect to see over 215,000 apartment units added to the region. So I guess the challenge is where are all these units going to be located and how can we best accommodate everyone who wants to be here. And I guess that's why it's useful to have these conversations and to engage and to further thinking and exploring other ways in which we can provide a dwelling stock that best fits the diverse and wide-ranging needs of the people that are here and the ones that are to come. So I'm going to just leave by reviewing some of the 2014 sales data for residential units in the Lower Mainland. So the Lower Mainland, we normally track all of these statistics at the much broader regional level, what we consider to be Greater Vancouver and the Fraser Valley. So previously I've been showing you and focusing exclusively on Metro Vancouver, but for the sales data, I want to show you the Lower Mainland because it's a functional region that is connected through transportation and jobs. It makes sense for us to explore the residential market entirely. And so if you look at the 53,000, in 2014 there were 53,710 sales, residential sales. And that was an increase of 27% from 2013. And the average sales price of those 53,000 units was $719,000, roughly. But when we take into account the entirety of all sales, we are considering and lumping in the very high-end units that you see over here, that go all the way to the one single detached unit that sold for $31.8 million last year. So what we like to do is to look at the bottom 80% of sales. What seems to be like the most reasonable segment of the market that the general average person is looking at when they are looking to buy a home. So there will always be a high-end to any market, and for us it seems more appropriate to look at the lowest 80% of sales, which is still represent 42,000, almost 43,000 sales last year. And when you look at that, the average for those 43,000 sales is significantly lower. So it is a contrast of the bottom 80% of sales averaging $462,000 in 2014. Of course, this is speaking about all structure types, including all communities throughout the Lower Mainland. And there's definitely variation, but I guess my point is that using an average or potentially the benchmark price even just gives you one point to focus on, whereas there is a range of prices and there is a range of dwelling types, and probably the conversation can be more nuanced than the headlines that we often read. And it often, at least for me, it gives me a slight more sense of hope or opportunity to maybe at some point, different places in our lives, some people can enter the market and maybe it doesn't feel as prohibiting as thinking of an average that might include very expensive high-end units. Oh, I do have the data for the city of Vancouver. So last year, the city of Vancouver, there were 12,500 sales that averaged over $1 million. If we only take into account the bottom 80% of those sales, so 10,000 sales, the average of those 10,000 sales was 621,000. So there's definitely a range within the region from one end to the other, but averages do obscure the ranges from which people can enter the market.
Yeah, so like I sort of hinted at before, I've lived in that, $1 million house in North Vancouver. I've had that sort of experience. I've owned that house, and I know what it takes to maintain that house and maintain that life, and what it means in terms of personal mobility and the ability to walk in your neighborhood. So when I made the decision to move our family downtown, I had that in mind, and I wanted to create a lifestyle for our family that was more connected to the community we lived in. So we walked like 8 or 10 kilometers a day at times, even with a family of 5 kids. That's 8, 7, 6, 5, and 3. So you're really sort of training them to be a lot more connected with their community, and to assume that you should walk everywhere instead of drive places. For me, that old adage about the stuff you own owns you is completely true, and I don't think that people really build in that proper assessment of sort of the cognitive load of ownership and maintenance, and what that takes away from your enjoyment of life. I mean, it's quality of life, it's not quantity of stuff. So when I hear sort of arguments about, well, I need a house and I need all this space, and then you really look at how much space you actually use in that house. There was a study that showed that about 400 square feet of 1,000 square feet gets used in a house of that size, and it's usually all the rooms, when you have a party and everyone gathers in the kitchen, and you have that dining room that no one ever uses, and why are you paying for that? Why do you think you need that? And why are you giving over your life to maintaining that instead of using what you use and living outside and enjoying what we have access to in the city?
Well, the short answer is that there is no data on speculators or investment that are being made by foreign investors in Canada. There's nobody tracking foreign investment in the residential market. There's no CMHC, the Canadian Housing and Mortgage Corporation, doesn't track that. There is really no numbers to base, I guess, to back the narrative that we hear regularly. And oftentimes, we don't know at this point if the speculators are primarily foreign or if they are just wealthy Canadians from other provinces, from other places. It is, at this point, just the story and I guess, it's the stories that we hear from realtors, it's the stories that make it to the media, but there is no data to confirm or deny that is a problem. I guess I have been hearing about using hydro data to see which units are empty, and I guess we'll find out which units are empty, and then what are we going to do about it? Like, if someone wants to sit on an empty home, then how can we force that to be otherwise? And if they are at an income bracket where that they can afford that luxury, I don't know how much a tax or a fee to have it empty will deter that sort of behavior. But then again, the only data that we have to determine unoccupied units at a comprehensive level is the census. And the census only tracks, when we look at the census numbers, we don't see that Vancouver stands out from any other major metropolitan region in terms of unoccupied units. And neither do we stand out when we look at apartments occupied by foreign or temporary residents. Granted, the census defines foreign and temporary residents as people that are not resident, not permanent residents of the city of Vancouver. So they could be foreign and live in Calgary or in Penticton or in the city of Victoria as a permanent resident and have a temporary home or inhabit a place here on a temporary basis. So it's not a clear-cut numbers, but I can share with you some of those numbers. So the apartments, because it's primarily apartments that are affected by these unoccupied issue, at least as per the census numbers. So the more recent 2011 census numbers say that 1.4% of apartment dwellings are occupied by foreign and temporary residents. So it's a very
Could you
small.
repeat that, please?
So 1.4% of the apartment dwelling stock. So a very, very small share of all apartments in the Vancouver CMA, so Greater Vancouver, are occupied by foreign or temporary residents as defined for the census. And then if we look at other CMAs, that is half the rate that we see in Kitchener and Waterloo area. And primarily the big concentrations of university towns where there's a huge concentration of post-secondary education, those are the regions throughout Canada that have the highest number of apartments hosting or being home to foreign and temporary residents, because most of these foreign and temporary residents are students, international students, or students coming from other provinces to attend those universities. And if we look at the region of Vancouver, Metro Vancouver, the city of Vancouver, it doesn't stand out as a terribly large percentage of apartments that are occupied by temporary residents either. It's 1.9% of the apartments in the city of Vancouver that are occupied by foreigners or temporary residents. And the highest share within the Metro Vancouver is on the university endowment lands. Then again, because UBC is there, and they have 5.8% of their dwelling stock, their apartment dwelling stock, occupied by foreign and temporary residents. So it's perhaps not the level of detail that people want to dig into, but there is no other better, more comprehensive source to investigate these sorts of issues. And
I think the point is that people can't afford to stay, period, whether that's renting, like a basement suite, whether that's, moving a little bit up because their one-bedroom condo is too small for their family. All these things are a spectrum of issues, right? And there's, of course, the homeless issue. People who are not, like families who are not able to buy a house and move into that house are using rental stock. That is displacing somebody who would normally be in that rental stock. And it goes all the way down to, the people who are unable to afford housing, period. And then on top of that, like when I met with the city of Vancouver last week, I said to them, you know what, one thing you can do to solve this entire issue for a lot of people, for a lot of the middle class, is by flooding the market with 2 to 3 bedroom, 1,000 square feet condos that are not $1 million, because right now we can, a townhouse is $90,000 for a 2 or 3 bedroom case, but maybe around $500,000. And if you flood the market and use market dynamics, we can actually still retain the families who want to stay here at a reasonable price. I'm not pining for land as much as I'm pining for a place to stay and to live in the long term in the city. But right now, it's an option between a 1-bedroom condo or a house, and a lot of people are looking at it and thinking, I can't afford a house, so I have to leave, and that's the problem.
Well, and because from a development standpoint, we had this conversation this morning, like the smartest thing to build from a development standpoint is something really small and just maximize the square footage you have as a developer at the expense of an individual. So, I don't know why, if the city can get involved and talk about, allocating market housing versus social housing in a particular development, I don't know why it's such a stretch to say that the city couldn't get involved and start saying, well, instead of 100, 2 and 3 bedroom units, can you do 150 in a new development? It makes perfect sense.
And what the city's response to that, when I asked them that question, is they are trying to force the developers to build larger suites that can accommodate families that are nurturing the families. However, the developers are pushing back because it's not a profit for them, it's less of a profit for them. So, but I said to them, they'll bend over backwards for you at this point. They'll build a school for you, they'll build, daycare in the building. You can force them to do these things. And I think a lot of us who want to have families within the next 10 years would be happy to stay and live in the way that you're living, you know. But I don't think we can do that in a one-bedroom condo.
Yeah. Like,
I'm not even sure you could flood the market to the point. I think there is an added complexity of how robust the demand for housing in the city is. And if, let's just say on the people that are here, if you could afford a townhouse, 2 or 3 bedroom for $500,000, how many of you could then like go in and enter the market, or how many of you would jump into that opportunity? And I'm just speculating that the demand would just open the opportunity for those people that are like waiting for the unit to be available and that maybe now are not going to enter the market. Like, there will be demand that will take up those units and raise the price up. Like, you can only, like, how many units will it take to flood the market? That is my question, because it is with very low interest rates currently, like just the economic landscape for becoming an owner, it's made it easier now to become an owner than it has in the past. And it has allowed more people to enter the ownership market and to flood a market that is that it has such a robust demand, like Vancouver. It would take an incredibly large amount of units.
Doesn't mean you shouldn't offer more of that stuff.
No, and I think we should advocate and we should demand from our policymakers and decision makers that they provide more, that they approve buildings and development that provides a range of options and that it is diverse. But I'm not sure if there is one sole strategy that could tackle the effects of the housing market and how the land economics works to build that.
If I can just jump in on that, like if we see housing as a purely economic situation of demand and supply and purely like the stock market, it completely takes people out of the question. It completely takes the community and the diversity and the interesting, the community that it built out of the question. If there are no restrictions, there was an entire tower which was 40 stories that was sold and completely sold abroad, right? Locals had no chance. Why? Why did they do that? Because they said there was no need for it. They have the demand from abroad, so they will sell it to abroad. But that's where policymakers should come in and say, that is not right. Locals should have had a chance, a fighting chance, at that apartment, at that condo that is now sold, that we haven't bought into. And I think, it comes back to the bigger question of housing as a commodity, housing as just another thing in the stock market. But I think policymakers in the city and in the federal government and in the province should sort of take a look at that and think perhaps it's time to introduce restrictions to protect average people. Because can average people in Canada be expected to compete with the globe's millionaires and billionaires? That's what we're looking at right now.